close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
All right, welcome, Learning Fives. All right, so I'm Danny Voicu. I'm from Loyola, a graduate. I coach the team over there, and I come over here at RMU sometimes to learn a little bit underneath Drake and to observe his coaching. Drake has been around for about 6.5 years coaching, and he's the head varsity coach for RMU. They actually just won a tournament recently, which was the
Yeah, Midwest Campus Clash.
Midwest Campus Clash, and that was for the wild card seeding for
We won wild card, and then we also went to Midwest Campus Clash, which was just a separate tournament. I think we won like $5,000 each.
All right, fantastic. Well, Drake was kind enough to share some time today to answer some of the questions that some of you coaches have put in or requested in advance. We're going to go through some of those questions, and afterwards we're going to open up for, we'll open it up for a Q&A for each of you. All right, so let us go ahead and start. Since on Reddit the biggest topic is toxicity, Drake, how do you handle a player that is toxic on team, specifically your top player?
So basically, the way that I've always perceived it, I'm hearing myself through your mic to throw me off. Here. Okay, that should fix it. Okay, so basically the way that I've always perceived it is that I've been working with a psychologist who works with us at RMU. He's Blake, really intelligent guy. And most players, whenever they're playing League, are using League as an escape, effectively. So it's very similar to almost like drug use, right? Like whenever people use drugs, their objective is to it's worse now. Okay, we'll try and figure this out, I guess. But basically, the idea is that they want to use the game as a way to escape real life pressures and social expectations, right? And the problem is that they go and they play in this competitive environment, and now they're forced into a socially competitive environment.
Let's talk about this mic.
Okay.
Here we go. We'll be giving this mic. This should work better here.
Okay. We are probably having equipment issues, I'm guessing, so I apologize for that, obviously. Let us know if it improves, but anyways, the basic idea is that people utilize this game as a method to escape, and then they go and they're thrown into a competitive environment where they are now forced to communicate with their teammates, and the issue is that most of the time they're using this game as an escape, and especially at higher level play, you'll notice a lot of players have really just screwed up like childhoods and things like that, where they've utilized the game as a way to escape those issues. And so what you want to do is ideally help them get past those greater issues. I don't like the idea of somebody being toxic and then you get really mad at them and you think that that's going to try and that's actually going to like shift what is wrong or like shift their behavior. A lot of times when you get mad at people who are toxic, the only thing is that they have a warped perception of reality in the first place, and so they're just going to resent you more. If anything, you want to be getting on their good side and practicing like good like empathy abilities, being able to like empathize with them, and ideally like help them see it from the realistic point of view of like why what they're doing is hurting other people. Because at the core of things, people care, like humans naturally should care about other people, and you just want to help them align in that aspect. So basically I would say every single situation is different. You know, I've had RMU, I'm not going to lie, and I'm very public about this, has insanely hard players to work with. Probably the hardest players I've ever worked with in my life are RMU. And so with me, I just had to know how to work with them differently. For example, my top laner, I have to speak with him in a different way than I do my mid laner. My mid laner needs me to work with him in a different way than I work with my AD carry. My AD carry needs me to be more strict on him than I do with, say, my jungler who just needs real life experience, and I need to explain to him how his actions are hurting his teammates and things like that. So a lot of the times it's just a lack of knowledge or a lack of like a greater emotional connection with people that causes toxicity in the first place. And usually you want to just try and soften the blows of those issues. And softening the blows is not necessarily like getting mad at them or yelling at them or something like that. It's like there's a greater issue, like a greater underlying issue that you want to get to the root of. That's why I think psychologists are really, really helpful. But if obviously you don't have, most people don't have access to psychologists, then your best bet is just connecting with them on a more like human-to-human emotional level.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Drake. All right. Moving to our next topic over here. What we have here is someone, let me say it as if I was them. I would mostly like Drake's opinion on analyzing the student's play versus teaching lessons independently of student gameplay. So teaching them specifically like how to team fight versus how much time should I spend on teaching them how to team fight versus going over those VOD reviews of the past games that they were playing.
Okay, so basically, my perception of this is that you need both the model and the mirror. So I take a very unique approach to how I train things, really, as opposed to most people. So effectively, first thing that you want to do is both are important, basically. You want to independently teach things, but you also want to look at other examples to pull to then get a good visual example. So basically what I usually do is I will, before we have scrims, I will have a meeting with the team and I will pull up good examples from like TSM or SKT or G2 or KT or Samsung, like good teams where they did a macro concept that we're struggling at really, really well. And then I'll go pull up a VOD of where we did it poorly, very specifically focusing on one point as opposed to focusing on like watching an entire VOD. If you watch 40 minutes of a VOD, there's a lot of wasted time there. So you want to go to very specific timestamps, show where we did it wrong, and then once again go to more examples of where teams do really, really well, and then reestablish how it's done correctly. So that way you're getting like an introductory understanding of the concept, then you're seeing how you did it wrong, so they're then getting the mirror, right? So you start out the model, you then get the mirror, right? And then you see another example of the model, so what you want to then aim and strive for. And you just want to make sure that players have a really good understanding of these concepts before you end up moving on to other things. But yeah, I think that pretty much the question, as far as I perceive it, kind of revolves around like, do you look at other outside examples that are really good, or do you look at it yourself and try and correct it? I think you do both, basically. So you want to be able to look at what you're doing it wrong, or how you're doing it wrong, and how it's done correctly. And building those visual examples is extremely important for like your subconscious to be able to pull from as you're performing in game.
Awesome. Actually, we might be able to fix this here.
Okay.
Actually, we'll just have to use this for now. Okay, so I actually have a question for you here. So one of the ways I do coaching, one of the ways I'm trying to develop this my own program is taking things bit by bit, starting from the basics, and then expanding upwards to the more complex like team fights. So my focus with my teams that I'm going to be starting with soon are breaking down, spending time understanding the lane matchups, optimization, and basically how each of the champions work before I even move on to the next level, which is going to be understanding map movements and understanding how are things going to happen over here. So do you think that's going to be a waste of time, or do you think taking the time to invest on understanding making sure that each person understands how to play each of their lanes versus whatever they're going to be facing, do you think spending the time to understand that and their level and to raise up the bar for them is worth it? Or should I go straight into, let's start playing, let's start doing flex queue and then picking up problems from there? So.
Yeah, so I agree with the like fundamental idea of like building upon fundamentals, largely just because that's how it's done every other skill, and I'm a huge advocate of this. Where I think that the issue could potentially, so basically for me personally, I focus very, very, very little on micro things. And the reason is because I have players who are already mechanically good enough, and so those things are perfectly fine. They know their lane matchups. It's really hard to not know lane matchups if you're challenger like 500, 600 LP.
Fair enough.
But as you are at lower levels, 90% of your wins are off of micro and things like that. So I think that it largely depends on what is the priority. I mean, if your priority is to win, then yes, putting heavy emphasis on micro is good, right? Because a lot of those things are micro. Like itemization, I'd say, is largely a micro thing. Champion matchups is a micro thing. Just micro mechanics is a micro thing. So I would say yes, if you want to win and you're at lower levels, that's probably something good to focus on. And then you have to reevaluate to see if there's actual growth coming from it. Because I do think it is insanely hard to micro-coach. The problem is that there's almost no way to have effective drills that are actually of value. The game is constantly changing at so many different points. It isn't like no other sport. And it is insanely hard to train micro as such. So if you do try to focus on micro and you realize there's not much growth and your objective is to win, maybe you then want to shift to like a macro approach. But I would say with lower level players, it's probably not a bad idea to start out with looking at some champion matchups and things like that. Only issue I could see is that as the meta shifts, champion matchups are going to change, itemization is going to change. Exactly. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a fundamental.
The only reason I'd be happy right now is if I got
So a few of you mentioned that there's people talking in the background. We are at RMU Esports Center, so some people are using the computers all the way in the back. Now, our next topic is going to be about how do you go about teaching objective prioritization and recognizing opportunities to a lower to mid ELO. If you want to go into the upper ELO, ELO level, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, we don't need to switch that much anymore.
Okay. So basically, the way that I would break this down is that I used to have a hierarchy of prioritization, basically, of objectives. Basically, obviously, at the top, you'd have the nexus. That tends to be the most important objective. And then from there, what I used to have it as is like inhibitors, and then I would say barons, and then I would say, I think it was towers, and then I would say dragons in some cases, and then I would say like vision, etc. And then basically, I used to put 0 priority on Elder Drag, and I used to put 0 priority on Herald, and things like that. I think it's a little bit different now. My perspectives changed. On many occasions, Baron is more effective than Inhibs. And basically, it's like, it's really, really hard because the situations are dynamic. Sometimes the team can take inhib, and the enemy team is incapable of wave clearing as you pressure other inhib towers, and then you can use that pressure from taking down inhib and supers pushing in to force them to have to answer, and then you end up getting more inhibs, right? But in a lot of comps, the enemy team should be able to clear all 3 lanes, including the inhib lane, even if you have another person pushing it. Which means that Baron ends up being of higher priority. So I actually think it depends on what the other team has in terms of Baron versus inhib priority. If the enemy team has no ability to wave clear super minions pushing in, it's probably better to take inhib, because taking that inhib will enable you to get the Baron afterwards, it'll enable you to get other inhibs, but if they do have solid wave clear versus that inhib in pushing lane, then it is probably better to take Baron, as you're more likely to get 2 inhibs or 3 inhibs or whatever. But so I would say that generally speaking, obviously you have Nexus at the top. If you're not prioritizing Nexus, you're playing the game wrong. And then I would say, generally speaking, I put Baron second, and then I put inhib, and then I probably put Elder. Elder obviously largely depends. Riot, a couple patches back, buffed the duration of Elder, I believe. Before then, it was just a horrifically bad objective. The thing lasted for like a minute. And so it can generally be good. Whenever we watch competitive games, we see teams usually put more priority on Baron for an obvious reason. But yeah, I'd probably put Elder there, and then I would put, or like, Drag, I think already you said tower. Basically like Baron, inhib, tower, everything else in like a very obvious way. I would basically say that you want to have that, you want to tell players about this like hierarchy, and you want to extend the hierarchy down to like as many things as possible. So like whenever I explained it to my players, we got down to like the like wards and stuff like that. So it's like lane pressure, and then I was like wards are slightly less important than lane pressure, and then we got down to like scuttles, and like you just want to have this hierarchy, and then as you go into games, and this is how you train everything really in League, is as you go into games, and you're reviewing games, you want to bring up this hierarchy. So like point out examples like here, we got lane pressure, right, after getting, or like here we got a whole bunch of kills, so now we want to go through our hierarchy. It's like, can we take Baron? No. Okay. Can we take a tower? No. Okay. Can we get Elder? No. It's like, can we get a dragon? Yes. Okay. And it's like, okay, we've gotten dragon. Can we keep going down and basically get as many things in that hierarchy as possible off of every single lead that you end up getting? And so basically you want to go through that hierarchy with every single play so that the players then in all of your reviews are getting immediate feedback on how they're doing it. And it'll eventually naturally end up becoming kind of like a subconscious skill that they'll naturally account for.
Okay. One way to bounce off of that, like one thing that I've been doing, or back when we were still playing Elo, when we're playing our practice matches, I would be with them while they're practicing, as you are with your team. I would, when something happens, we win a team fight, I would basically yell out, be like, what's the next objective? And have the team choose that next objective to go immediately, regardless if it's the best one or not, because I think that through experimentation, like, once they develop the system and understand the system, that they'll be making those better decisions. But if they don't make those, if they don't take the initiative to all follow it instantly, I think that's going to possibly, it's one thing that might hinder them. And I think, you know what, they might fail at that scrim practice. They might make a mistake, but they're getting faster at choosing what to do.
So I've done similar things before as well. Something that I think is more effective, I think if you are not involved, it eliminates more steps basically, where it's like eventually you have to wean down on the amount that you're like kind of like getting them to make those decisions, and your goal is to make it subconscious. So something that I did was I went to my support at RL and I was basically like, okay, every single time that I tap your shoulder, I want you to ask the team what our next objective is. Okay? And so we're playing the game and I tap his shoulder, and then that would be a physical cue for him to say it, right? And then eventually I would tap his shoulder after every single time that we take an objective, so he would start to build the subconscious like trend or like habit that every single time we take an objective, he's supposed to ask what's our next objective. And so I'd use this like physical cue, and I did this for like a week and a half to 2 weeks. Yeah, and basically eventually it became just like totally natural for him, and I stopped doing it. And you literally watch him play. It's the funniest thing. It's almost like he's like used to being tapped on the shoulder, and then that ends up like causing that response basically. So I think that's one way that you can go about it, just like using cues basically.
Simple cues.
Exactly. Yeah, like using anything that's going to cause a response from the player that just like triggers that chain. And then eventually you do want to pull back the comms as well, because you want it to become subconscious. And that's where it gets really difficult, is it's really hard to control how much your teammates or your players are talking about something. So it's a little bit hard. So I would say that's one way that you can go about it. I think that you have to kind of evaluate and see what is necessary, how quickly your teammates learn, or like your players learn, or what the most effective way would be, or sometimes something is not difficult enough to the point where it's like a necessity for them to even need that in the first place. Yeah, I think that's definitely one way that you can go about it.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then also going off of like objectives, when you're looking at the dragons, we understand that Infernal Mountain, they have really great benefits throughout the game. Ocean, people say that it's you benefit the most earlier on. However, like you definitely can feel the benefits later on as well. And but what's your opinion about the Cloud Dragon? I personally have a strong opinion, and I love the Cloud Dragon because I love moving around the map. And if you can get 2 or 3, and let's say if you have a Janna on your team, you're flying. What's your opinion about like prioritizing the dragons? And what?
So basically, I would say that I used to think that dragons were awful. My genuine opinion used to be that Infernal was quite good, and other dragons just felt really, really weak in my opinion. So I would say yes. I would say Infernal is quite strong. Infernal is just plain and simple a very, very good objective. Period. I would say that if anything, one of the objectives that I'm not a fan of as much is actually Mountain. And the reason why I'm not a massive fan of Mountain is because I think lower level teams and players especially make really bad decisions based on Mountain. And I could go super in depth on this, but I think every single play is basically a pressure-based play, which is built off of having lanes push effectively and forcing the enemy team to respond to your push-out lanes, or based around denying of vision. Which is effectively clearing out vision, and then off of their lack of information, usually creating a pick or something like that, or speed, which is something that I've thought about a lot recently. And the deal is that most speed-based plays shouldn't be done at lower level plays, and basically a speed-based play would be trying to rush Baron before they can get to you in time, right?
Yeah.
So it's executing it very quickly with no benefit in vision, no benefit in pressure, but just doing it fast.
My team hated me because I always made them do that.
Yeah, so it's like, I think that there are like very key points where it is like good and is necessary, but for low level teams, a lot of the times they'll do it just because they're like, wow, we have 2 mountain drags, let's do this play, even if it is like not the correct play. Like maybe they need to get waves pushed out and clear out vision and take a slow approach. So a lot of the times, lower level teams and lower level players get like 3 mountain drags and they're like, do Baron, like we're gonna clear this like super fast, and then they just get like engaged on and killed, or like Baron gets smited and stolen or something like that. So it like causes them to skip steps. I would say the mountain is probably like one of the like ones that I don't like as much, because I think most of the time you don't actually need it in order to take objectives. Sometimes it may speed it up or speed up the process.
Yeah. It's
but
only, I think, this game is 10, 20,
yeah,
30.
it's 10, 20, 30% true damage of the actual like damage that you're putting out.
Yeah.
So it can be like insanely good, right? But the deal largely is that I don't think a lot of the times it's necessary. If you're playing the game correctly, every objective you take should be free, basically. Unless you're in very, very specific scenarios. I believe that Cloud Drag has massive benefits if you are like the right team and you play the game the right way. I've recently been talking about TSM does these really cool like 1-man rotations between 1-3-1s, and they catch the enemy off guard. Really
I was
cool
listening to
vision.
that yesterday, so.
Yeah, they do really cool vision tricks and things like that, where they'll do 1-man rotations, and that'd be super beneficial with Cloud Drake, because it's all about time, right, and being on time. So I think that Cloud could be really beneficial in that aspect, but I think the big rule is all drags are beneficial. I think Ocean is best early game. I do agree with that, but I would say at the same time, it is drastically better to get towers. It is drastically better to ensure that the dragon is free. Most of the time when you're fighting over a dragon, I think that you're playing the game wrong. A lot of the times, to me, if you're fighting over a dragon, you're playing the game wrong. You should be like pushing up and being very aggressive and falling back on the dragon. You shouldn't just have like an even map and an even game and then doing dragon and then having a 5v5 fight over like 10% extra damage on towers, which you probably won't end up using in the first place. So I think it is perfectly fine to go for these dragons so long as you are using them correctly and so long as you're not like fighting over them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Now moving on, we have a few more questions and stuff, and then we might I might expand on a few of these questions with follow-up questions.
Yeah.
But one question here, someone asked, how do you go about aligning how you coach with the different needs of 5 different students? So, like for me personally, I actually really like personality tests, specific personality tests, not just like the general like Myers-Briggs. I like using these ones that have companies use. For example, I use the core values index, so I can know what motivates someone, what's like the beneficial, most beneficial thing for them to receive from me. Sometimes it's just that emotional support and like that friendship and showing like, dude, if you do this over here, you're going to like make this big impact for your team. And them understanding that, they're like, oh, dude, I'm going to do that from now on, or I'm going to try to do things like that. Other people, they need those numbers. So let's say I have someone who's really data focused, I go about, if I ever decide to tell them to do something, I have to show them the numbers. How do you go about tailoring to like different players' needs? So, or figuring that out first of all.
Yeah, I think that's a cool approach to take using personality tests. I would say, well, I think that one of the most important skills of a coach is how quickly you can learn your players, right? And for me, it's just I build really strong relationships with all my players. So it's like, for example, when we were at Midwest Campus Clash, we're up on stage and there are a ton of mid laners banned out this tournament, and I go to my mid laner, we have to blind pick a mid, and I'm like, so what are we picking now? We have like 30 seconds till we have to lock in a champ. And then he's like, I don't know, you banned all the mids, dude. And I'm like, yeah, I know, dude, you're going to have to figure something out. And it's because I know that at that point, he's like very stressed out from like competition, stuff like that. And I just wanted to create like a light environment. And then I was like, okay, dude, just pick Cass, right? And then he picked Cassidy, and then we won the game. But
That was
it's
Cassidy
about,
versus Vlad?
I think so, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like we actually know it's Cassidy versus Talon, and the deal was
Really?
it's not an outstanding matchup for Cassidy, but we knew that the enemy mid laner couldn't play Talon. He has 0 Talon games, so he of course ended up winning the lane and was really strong. But yeah, I think it is extremely important to be able to figure out your players in the first place. That's like the first thing that you do when you're going onto a team is just trying to read every single thing that your players say and how they act and how they react to things. And I try to figure out my players' like childhood, because that tends to impact things the most. So it's like, of my players, I know 4 out of 5 of their like almost like entire life story, because I just want to know them to the best of my ability, so I know how to speak to them and how to talk to them and how they need to learn and things like that. And I want to help them push past mental barriers and like their own self-perception of themselves. Some players think like, I learn really slow. I want to show them that's not true. You know, like I want to basically just learn my players better than they know themselves. To the best of my ability, and then I just want that to become subconscious for me to know what the best response is for them. Every single day when I get home, I write down how I interacted with all of my players and how I should have changed it and what I'm going to do to change that. I think that's the most important, second most important aspect of like being a coach when it comes to people. You know, I think that the most important thing that a coach has to have is the ability to see the positives in people. And a lot of people like look at me weird whenever I say this, but like at the end of the day, the reason I put in so much work for my players is because I genuinely care about them. And I think that that is the core of putting in tons of work. You can never work your hardest unless you genuinely care about the people that you're working for, right? So the deal is like, you at the core of things have to figure out your players as people. I don't view them as players. I say their actual names. I genuinely care about them, right? And I just want to figure out how I can help them, and then from there I'm able to make the right decisions and things like that as to how they need to learn. And then on top of that, you know, there's in-game stuff too, so figuring out their strengths and weaknesses. I think what's most important is just like taking notes of your players every single day. That way you are developing, like, every single day you're improving at how you teach them and how you talk to them and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, and then also like bouncing off of that, like getting that fundamental understanding of the player as a person, that's probably going to allow you to, let's say someone comes in, they just had something really tragic happen in their lives. You're able to notice that's happening to them, or they're open to telling you about that, and you can, how do you go about resetting a player who is, let's say their girlfriend or boyfriend broke up with them literally the hour before they come to practice or a big match?
I mean, I think that letting the emotional process play out is extremely important. You know, like if my girlfriend broke up with me, I'd be just like devastated. And there's nothing like, yes, you can practice what I believe is called emotional displacement. You can practice emotional displacement. You can try to displace your emotions from real life from your play. That's just going to build up long-term stress, and it's going to not allow the emotional process to play out. You know, so it's like, I, on many occasions, have canceled practice because a player had IRL things going on or something really important going on. For example, I had a player who had a tryout with a really good team or something like that, and we had a really big match coming up in like 2 days or something, and he asked if we could take the day off of practice, and I knew if I denied him that opportunity, he would end up resenting me. So what I ended up doing was we met in the middle, and I was like, okay, here, you don't have to go to our meeting. That way you can get in more games of practice with them, okay? But I still need you to go to scrims, and if we do really, really well and you play really, really well, scrims will end early because we beat them a whole bunch that they'll be fine with canceling early. Okay, that's the best I can do for you, right? So it's
Did it work out that way?
Yes, it did
Awesome.
actually. So it worked quite well. But basically, it's like there's like a balance basically that you have to play with like the real life situations that players are going through and like your performance. But I think it's really important to allow the emotional process to take place. Like that's a natural response of humans that they need to go through in order to heal. You know, it's like if you broke your leg and then you're expecting people to be able to walk again. It's like the same exact thing.
Yeah.
So it's like if they're emotionally broken, something happens, let it play through, try and be there for them and support them, and definitely don't like get mad at them for how they're feeling.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, just try and help them through whatever. If they need advice, give them advice. If they don't need it, just let things play through. Be patient.
And what if you don't have that
If you
advice?
don't have, yeah, well, if you don't have the advice to give them or
Direct
whatever,
them to like some support.
yeah, direct them to some support. I mean, if you need them to be able to perform immediately, try and help them through, you know, that emotional displacement, or try and find some different motives for them in the game. So basically, it's kind of like try and tell them like, yo, your girlfriend dumped you. Go pro in LCS so you get a whole bunch of e-girls or something like that. You know, that can be your approach to motivating them to try and like get them to want to try harder or something like that. But I think that there are a lot of approaches that you can take to that issue.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, this is actually a really good one. How do you balance your friendliness with the players so you can develop that good relationship and the authority you have as a coach? So like stay as an authority figure, but still have that like we're a team mentality, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But they still respect you as a coach.
Yeah. So I think that the big word there is just respect. I think that's like the core of it. With me, with my players, I am their friend. They also understand I am their coach. And I don't ever think like, oh, I need to be authoritative here. It's simply that they respect me and I know how to talk to them to where we have mutual respect as people who care about each other, right? So they will not end up acting out like against me. And if they do something that's really selfish, then I want to assist them in like understanding why it is wrong, right? Because if you're just like punishing people, if they don't understand why they're being punished or what they did wrong, then that's getting absolutely nowhere. Like I've never liked the parent example where a parent just like gets mad at their kid and the kid is just so confused as to what they did wrong. So it's like I want to help them understand why it is wrong and things along those lines. So I would say at the core it's just respect, and my players respect the hell out of me because A, I care about them so much as people. B, I put in insane amounts of work. And C, the amount of sacrifice I put into them. They know that I'm not doing this out of getting money or being famous or whatever. It's literally just that I want to see them do well at the core of things. And it's genuine. And so they respect me because they know that they can trust themselves and their emotions. And because largely, for us, competition's an emotional experience, right? You lose or you win, right? And they know they can trust me with that. So at the end of the day, they respect the hell out of me. So to me, I don't even think like I need to be authoritative and like be on top of them all the time. My AD carrier, well, support now, for example, Evan RL, I need to be on top of him. Why? Because he is quite lazy, you know. But then it's like I may have another player who isn't lazy, but he's just kind of being a dick to his teammates. But me getting mad at him isn't necessarily going to make that stop. It's like I need to help him understand why that's bad, or help him empathize with his teammates, or help him understand things. You know, last year at RMU, whenever I wasn't here, it was like people rage quitting scrims and things like that. This is a team that shouldn't do well. I say this all the time. You know, different players literally should despise each other. And for me, it's just been about teaching empathy between players and things along those lines, to where it's like, I don't think it's about being like authoritative as much as it's just about knowing how you talk to different players. So it's like I said, for a lot of situations, if somebody's acting out, it's because they don't know better, or they have some type of misperception of what's going on, and they just need you to help them understand things. But at the beginning, it starts with respect, because they'll listen to you if they respect you.
Then one example that I have, so when I have a complete opposite perspective of the player and they're not willing to listen, the way I compromise with them is at this next scrim. I tell them, hey, we'll do it this way, my way first, and then we'll do your way second. We'll see which way works out better, regardless of outside factors. So everyone else like playing poorly, we'll focus on our play here. So for example, that was back in October. I loved Lulu. Back before she became like the OP support. I loved her even in the mid lane, and I told them, hey, listen, if we take you putting Lulu here against this LeBlanc matchup, I can guarantee you that you'll at least go even in lane. You'll deny her the possibility of snowballing and just snowballing against our entire team. And he was just like, no, Lulu is the worst champion in the world. And I'm like, I understand she's been nerfed, but let's try this out. We did it. It worked out just fine. He still hates Lulu, regardless, but it worked out. How do you go about compromising with a player if you guys have completely conflicting viewpoints?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, me and my players disagree on plenty of things about the game and stuff along those lines. But the deal is, like, at the end of the day, they largely respect like 99% of the things I say, but all the time we're not going to necessarily agree. So usually what I'll end up doing, it really depends on the situation. I mean, there have been times where we've had unimportant matches coming up or scrims coming up where they've said something and I've been like, okay, we'll do it your way. But in 2 weeks, I want you to come back and tell me how that worked out. And like almost every single time, I end up being right. And so they end up being largely proven wrong, right? So it's like, there are different approaches you can take. I mean, I think you can take that approach of letting them, let's learn from experience. But let's say you have a super important matchup coming up, and then you kind of have to balance, like, basically, I think compromising under highly, highly important matches most of the time leads to failure. Yeah. So because the deal is there's a right answer, right? Compromising at the end of the day, there is a right answer, right? So that's the biggest problem. So what you want to do is try and not have those situations in important matches, and then whenever you actually do have those important matches coming up, and both people just tend to really, really disagree. I think the most important part is that you're talking through it, and you're just both trying to be extremely reasonable and
factual,
not making
attacking each other. Determine these are the pros and cons for this. Looking at this, we should be choosing this.
Yes, and then try and find as many actual examples as you possibly can to what the situation is, or getting outside perspectives on what the situation is, and be totally open to being wrong too. I tell people all the time, I may be wrong. That is perfectly fine. Okay, you may be wrong. That is perfectly fine. I just want to find the right answer at the end of the day. They know that entirely. So I will use a whole bunch of different examples, and I'll try and pull from other people's opinions and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd say at the end of the day, there's a lot of approaches you can take, and it depends on the scenario. I think that the best way to go about it is find the right answer. And to find the right answer, ask people who are more intelligent, or who know more about the game, or who have a different perspective. Or for example, me and my support always draft against each other, Tim Van draft against each other just to test things, right? And then sometimes he'll be like, no, this champion wins this matchup in mid lane or something. And I'm like, okay, I'll go ask the 5 challenger mid laners that I know, and we'll have the right answer. And sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes he's right. A really, really good example would be before Vlad ended up getting played again, I was saying that Vlad is a bad champion, and he was telling me, no, it's not. And I said, in a week, we'll check back and we'll see how that goes. Sure enough, Vlad started getting played. I was wrong. I admitted it. So I think just find the right answer, be very reasonable, don't make it an emotional issue.
Okay. And then also you mentioned something about a toxic player and how you don't want to yell at them. One experience that I've had and the way I dealt with it was I explained the situation. When I even recently with one of my new teams that I was working with, really recently, it took me about 3 weeks to determine to help them develop that the mentality that voicing your negative opinion is never a good thing. Because if, let's say, everything's going downhill, let's say you're at ULOL, final match, you guys, it's 2-2, you guys are behind 10 kills. You saying that, pardon language, shit, we're down, I can't do anything. That only solidifies everyone's mentality on, crap, we're in a shithole. So my argument with this is that, hey, listen, I understand everything's going poorly. However, you guys have to be proactive and think about what's the next move that you can make to gain back the lead. Do not verbalize your opinion, because that's going to put everyone in a locked mentality where they're going to lose. How do you go about I guess, dealing with that type of communication and mentality in the game?
Yeah, I think first thing that's really important is just practicing emotional displacement, which is like your emotions as a result of this game need to be put elsewhere, and you need to focus entirely on the game. I think this is why Koreans, one of the big benefit of Koreans is that in life in general, they're very, very good about emotional displacement. So like their emotions that they're having with like school and stuff, they have to put to the side so that they can focus on school, right? It allows them to kind of stay in the zone. And so, you know, this is a problem that we definitely have at RMU, of players like going into matches, things not working out very well, and then, you know, us just being in a position where we have to remain focused on the game. And I think that a lot of the times when our players have this issue of expressing these, like their emotional angers towards the current game, a lot of that does arise from like greater issues in childhood that build up until this point right now. Like toxicity usually is as a result of something happening in childhood that has lingered into this position where it's an emotional response to the game. So I would say that trying to get to the core of whatever these problems are is extremely important. Maybe your player that was like really ignored as a child or something like that, and he would rather quit than lose, right? Because failure really gets to him or something. And so off of him going through failure, he is having this emotional experience because he knows he's going to fail, right? Maybe you want to help him get to the core of those, and usually getting to the core of those is just acknowledging that it exists and acknowledging that it's okay to feel like crap, right? And then, you know, hopefully trying to work through not expressing those emotions that way and maybe displacing them until after. Tell them you can be as mad as you want after this set, but during this set, I want you to stay focused on the game and displace those emotions till after the set. Then you can scream at me all you want, right? But until after, I want you to stay entirely focused on the game, right? And it largely is just about that trust, right? It really does. It really does come down to that. Because if your player trusts and respects you, and they care about you the way that you care about them, they're not going to be doing those things, and they're going to do their absolute best to not you know, to follow what you're trying to recommend them to do whenever they're actually like in the game. I think there are a lot of approaches that you can take. I think it's different with every single player. I'd say at the core of it, it's about getting to what the core of those issues are. I've never met a toxic player or a player with toxicity problems where it wasn't a greater issue. So, like, for example, I worked with Moon on a team called Franklin Gaming before he ended up going into TLA, and then I believe he went to Energy, and then he ended up going, of course, to FlyQuest, right? And he was very hard to work with, but the reason he was hard to work with is because he was so scared of losing. Like, he got so emotional because he wanted to win really, really bad. He cared so much about winning, so he got really emotional, and I tried to explain to him the importance of, like, okay, if you want to win really, really bad, then you getting emotional is just hurting your chances of winning, right? So you want to displace those emotions until later, and then you can express them however you'd like to. Ideally not to your teammates, but however you'd like to, right? And it just helped him understand and get along this process a lot better. And now, as far as I'm aware, those type of toxicity issues don't really exist. So I got to the core of the issue, I helped walk him through it, and then we got to the kind of finish line of improvement. And you know, at the core of that, the entire basis of being able to do that is like trust and respect and empathy and caring about each other, which I think is really interesting because most people don't think about that when it comes to coaching.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I come from a sports background, so like I find it strange that people don't find it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you mentioned, like actually there's a video that came out that Steve, Liquid112, he mentioned how getting these investors and helpers from these NBA teams, they would tell them about how to react to different situations. My response is like, I thought that was normal because I come from a sports background. So, and as you mentioned, like league players, they don't this might be their first competitive area in life where they don't get to experience these things where they have the support staff. So.
Yep.
All right. Now, one of our last questions. So, if you want to become a coach for like an amateur team, how do you balance the time to develop your skills and your own personal life? I have my own opinion, but like I'm not the level where you're at with your developed program and getting the paid to do this. So
I would say It probably depends on what you consider amateur, first of all. So for me, whenever I think of amateur, I'm thinking NACS, because that's not. I mean, I guess it'd be under the technical term of professional, where you're doing it for a full-time living. Amateur, I would perceive as amateur because it's not LCS, right? Whenever we think of professional, we think LCS. So I would think amateur be NACS. If you want to coach an NACS team, then the work-life balance is basically a joke. And I know that that's kind of a crummy thing to say, but whenever I was living with coaching at NACS, I slept 6 hours a day. Everything else from the entire day, from the second I wake up to the second I slept, was all league 24/7. And so work life didn't really exist for me. Now, if we're talking amateurs and not even like open qualifiers, even open qualifier is going to be an issue because you basically have like 2 months of actual practice, then you have open qualifier occur, and then you basically have like the entire half year to have your life happening, you know? So if we're talking amateurs and like below open qualifier, just like a team that competes in like small tournaments or things like that, I think at that level, your competition as a coach is so low that you can probably just dedicate like an hour a day to the game, and then just use your life as a way to develop yourself as a coach, in the sense of like, I'm going to try and be a better person. And if you're just trying to be a better person, you're going to naturally become a better coach in the first place, right? So just train coaching in its essence through life, and then spend an hour a day just watching the game, looking at pick bands and things like that. And I think that's more than enough time to actually develop, your ability to coach at an amateur level. But if we're talking about you're getting up to greater levels, let's say that amateur team is Voicu, then you need to focus like as much as possible so that you're not screwing over your players over this like month and a half period of training, and then you get to have your life balance. But if we're talking about esports is extremely high stakes. If you fail in NACS or LCS, everybody in your org can lose their jobs and like millions of dollars are lost. I really don't think that there is much of like this life balance aspect of things. For me, whenever we were competing or prepping for ULOL playoffs, like regional playoffs, we would have double scrim blocks every single day, Monday through Thursday. So that means 2 to 5, 6 to 9 we're scrimming. I would wake up at around 8, get ready from like 8 to 9, from 9 to 9:30 I get here, from 9:30 until 2 I was prepping for practice or going through our meetings, and then from 2 to 9, we're practicing. So the deal is there wasn't really life balance. For me, life balance was literally I got home and I talked to my girlfriend and then I fell asleep. And that was it. So it was just work, and then like life. And the deal is that when you're in that environment and you have extremely important matches coming up, for RMU, we've never actually came in first. So for me, I wouldn't be the first coach for East first. So it matters a lot. So I think that it's different than with like a traditional job where there is not necessarily this massive like end goal. You may have like a project you're working on, and you have a lot of people working on this project, and if you don't really succeed, then your company's still generally afloat. I know that there's some situations that's not always true. Maybe if you're in a startup, you have a really important deadline. But generally speaking, you're afloat and you're fine. It's not like that in esports. You have extremely important deadlines. So I think that life, it's not like a consistent life balance as much as it's like at the beginning, more life, less work, and then it slowly shifts to more work, less life. And then eventually you hit the deadline and then it's like life, and you get to refocus on that aspect.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's all we have for the questions, roughly. I guess, let's see. Actually, yeah, no, that's going to be all we have for the questions. What we're going to do now is open up to the Q&A. So what we can have here is you guys can type your messages here, or if you have me on Discord, you can private message me. Ask your questions here.
And if we don't get any other questions, there's like one more question that I believe is here as well that we can probably just cover in the case that they don't flood in.
I do have a fun question for you to answer. Who is the most interesting player that you've ever worked with? It could be good or bad. You don't have to say what it was, but actually, you decide for yourself.
Sure. It's an interesting one, actually. I had a really interesting relationship with Bishu whenever I was working with him.
He was top lane, right?
Mid lane.
No, mid lane for...
Did he play top for a while? He played mid for Vortex, which is an NACS team. And so I worked with him there. So I will answer that.
Okay.
in a bit.
Thanks. Demos. Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say with Bishu, I had a really interesting relationship with him in that he would get like very upset and pressured the hell out of me all the time about my coaching and how like we needed to work harder and that I needed more game knowledge and things like that. And my immediate response was, this player's hard to work with, he's toxic, etc. But over time, I kind of started to realize that he just cares a lot and he really wanted to win and be the best. Very similar to Shady, who I worked with the RMU, who's now with P1. He was the same thing. And because I'd already experienced that with Bishu, I loved Shady for it. I was like, this player pushes me to my limits.
I could see that like when it came to like observer, like, he would always go that way.
Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
probably Bishu. Veritas was a little bit on the difficult side to work with too. Acadian was interesting because he's a Rengar top lane only player whenever I worked with him.
That was before the rework too.
Yeah, that was before rework and before he went to jungle. So I've had some experience.
And coaches or analysts?
Coaches or analysts I worked with. Saint's a character. Saint's a character I've worked with who's very interesting. No comment. My favorite player I've worked with is probably either Shady or Biofrost, one of those two.
Okay.
They're definitely really great to work with. So this question, when you don't have physical access to your students, how do you help them learn to do things subconsciously? So I think that largely has to do with like the passion of the players, to be 100% honest. In the sense that if players aren't very passionate, it's really hard to get things out of them, basically. So it's hard to just trust players to do the things that you try and tell them to do. So usually what my ability or my focus on things is that I try to use conscious thinking, or like, I try to use conscious awareness and conscious thinking to influence subconscious ability, which is basically like, I'll like tell players before a game, focus on this, actively focus on this, or maybe like I'll have them set up a hitbox stream so there's only a 10-second delay on scrims or whatever. That way I'm not having to watch the 3-minute delay of like actual spectator client, right? And then what I will end up doing is I will like message them on League off this 10-second delay stream, like, okay, talk about what we're going to do next. Right, and then that could be your way of like a conscious trigger, and then you want these conscious triggers over and over and over until it eventually becomes a subconscious skill. So I really like the fact that you asked a question about how to learn to do things subconsciously. It's all about conscious first, like it starts consciously, and then you want it to become subconscious. And it's really hard to do when you don't have them physically there. But what you can do, like I said, is like just try and find things. That largely depends on the player. Do you have a player who's really easy to work with? Have them be the conscious trigger, right? So every single time you finish an objective, have player X say, what is our next objective, right? Because maybe that's the player you can trust. Or maybe you have a player who has insanely good internet, he like is in NASA HQ or something, and then you can have them stream on Hitbox that you don't have a delay, and then you can have your conscious triggers be off of like messaging them in big client or something like that.
Where How do you help them? Also, in Learning Fives, we have only around 5 weeks with our students. What do you feel is the best way to convey as much information as possible without overloading them in such a short time period?
Yeah, so I would say you just want to touch on like the most important things that are impacting your play that are the easiest to fix. So I think just figuring out what you want to work on first is the best way to go about it. So it's like, for example, one of TSM's biggest problems is that they're so good that they'll execute on plays that are just like a little bit too pushed, right? They're like slightly too aggressive. That's insanely hard to fix. Because if you just tell them stop being aggressive, then all the plays that they do that are good that are aggressive, they stop doing. So you're actually losing more than you're gaining. Right, so that's a really, really hard fix. If I was in this environment learning fives and that was the case, I wouldn't do anything. I literally wouldn't touch it because that's so hard to solve, right? Instead, I would look at some of the other things that are easier to fix. So I would kind of try and find what is the easiest things to fix that would have the largest impact on our improvement and our performance, and then you want to start to focus down on those things. Now the problem with like the conscious subconscious thing is that depending on what you're doing, especially if you have a trigger system that you're trying to like the thing that I explained with like tapping a player, that's like a trigger-based system. You do that, it triggers them to consciously think about something. Eventually, it'll become subconscious. Especially if you have those, that can take a very long time to develop. So whenever you're doing these like conscious, subconscious things, you usually want to figure out the things that you can just tell players, and then have them focus on it for like 2, 3, 4 days, and then move on to another topic. And usually, that's a lot better than things where it has to be like. It has to become like trained into them, ingrained into them over the course of like 2 weeks. So you want to figure out like the easiest things, the easiest solution to problems, I would say.
Okay. Or the simplest?
Yeah, like simplest solutions. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Our next question here is: what are recommended resources to learn coaching, and/or teams or leagues to watch?
So I'm a massive fan of books, and I think that basically around whenever like November, I think it was like 2015, when our coaches started to become officially recognized by LCS, I was in a position where I'm like, I've done this for a long, long time, and I'm not an LCS yet. So I need to find a way to differentiate myself from the flooding of coaches into the scene. And so what I want to do was figure out more about sports psychology and like coaching and leadership skills and things like that. So I started reading. And so I think that the best resource for a coach is basically to break down coaching and then read books that pertain to each of those things. So I usually say, and this is my biggest thing that I tell to anybody, I think a great coach is a leader, a teacher, and an expert. And so you want to perfect each of those 3 skills, right? Or aspects. I wouldn't even call them skills in themselves. They're such broad topics. So my favorite book that I recommend to every single beginner coach is basically Leading with the Heart or Leading by the Heart by Coach K from Duke. And I believe he's probably one of the best coaches that there is in anything. John Wooden, his book Wooden is very, very good. And it's also a really good start. It basically goes over life as well as coaching. And I think that's a really, really good one for sure. And then off of that, I'd start learning about teaching and training. So The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle is insanely useful as well. Kind of starts to go over psychology of training and improving. And then after that, probably like The Art of Learning is really, really good by John Waitskin, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Or Josh Waitskin, I think it is. So that one's also very good as well. And basically, I would just read as much as you possibly can. It was so, so useful. And then basically you said teams to watch or leagues to watch. So basically, I wouldn't watch EU and I wouldn't watch LPL. Those are the 2 regions I don't think you watch. You pretty much only watch NA or Korea, and that's like it. Okay.
Could you expand on why you? I actually can understand LPL. Why do you say not EU?
EU, a lot of the players. So like with NA, we tend to like we import a lot, but in the case that we're not importing, a lot of our players tend to have very like well-rounded champion goals and well-rounded play styles and things like that. A lot of EU players, for some reason, just the dynamic of EU solo queue is a lot of one tricks, which is definitely seen in Korea. ADD for I think MVP plays a ton of Scion. For example,
the support.
Top. No, they have a top laner on I think MVP that plays a ton of Scion, and they picked it versus KT even into like the worst matchup in the world. So it's like yes, that exists in Korea, but a lot of EU players are like one tricks or extremely stubborn, and so they won't expand on the champion pools and playstyles and things like that. A lot of the coaches are extremely underdeveloped, so you don't see well-rounded and strong macro play. And then even of the players, now that all their players have just been sent to NA, they don't tend to have extremely strong mechanical players even as well. And there are massive mechanical differences between laners as well too, to where you can pick like the worst bot lane in the world against another bot lane and still win. So you'll get wrong perceptions. You'll think, I should pick Twitch and Decay every game. It's like, no, you should not do that. It just happens to be that I think it's HUK's bot lane is bad. That's all that it actually is. So I would say NA probably has more even matchups, more well-rounded like coaching and macro and things along those lines. Korea obviously has like very good macro and works around a lot of their flaws a lot better than EU. LPL is just like solo queue, so I wouldn't recommend that. And then teams to watch very specifically, TSM probably has some of the most interesting workarounds to their weaknesses. They have a very weak bot lane. They work around that very well, so I think it's easy. And then C9 plays off of having very strong laners too, so it kind of shows you how you should play the game if you're winning a lot in the laning phase.
How about FlyQuest?
SKT is like perfect. I would not recommend it. I don't think FlyQuest is awful. I think FlyQuest is pretty similar to P1 when they have Meteos on board. It's kind of like you have one person who really gets macro, and then a whole bunch of other people who just happen to be there. So you see a lot of these kind of like issues, but also some decent macro. So I would say like TSM C9 for different reasons, and then KT is similar to C9 in that they have very strong laners and they can constantly adjust their playstyle because they have strong laners. And then SKT is kind of like on the side of just being perfect. So I'd recommend them. G2 is decent when they go.
Okay. What is the most important thing or piece of advice you would tell a first-time coach that's coaching like 5 bronze, silver, or even gold players?
Watch a lot of games and look for trends. If you see a team do something one game but they don't do it within the next 5 games, it probably is wrong. So look for trends when you're watching games and really focus on how you communicate with players. Because to me, at the beginning of coaching, it's just game knowledge and your ability to communicate to players, how you teach things. Really focus on getting those down to the core basic to your coaching, and then expand from there after like a year even.
Okay.
All
right. Well, thank you, Nayland, for your spam. Let's go with your first question here. Imagine you're hiring a new player for your team. You have option between 2 players. One is a very talented, team-oriented player. Other is extremely mechanically skilled and has high carry potential. Which do you choose?
I think that largely has to do with attitude. So usually speaking, I would actually pick a mechanically skilled player. And the reason is because it's really, really hard to train mechanics. It is quite easy to teach macro. So you can teach this player macro, right? And macro, that's very easy to do, right? But to actually like train him in mechanics is really, really hard. Like if you take a basketball player who has like really, really good fundamentals and things like that, you can like fit him and orient him within the team. That's not impossible. But to take somebody who's like already 20, 30, and like teach him like the micro skills of like basketball is almost impossible, right? So I would actually take a mechanically skilled player and teach him the macro, so long as I was very confident in my macro knowledge and ability to teach.
Awesome. Next one. If someone in your team cannot show up, would you rather go for a scrim with an unaffiliated sub or cancel the scrim?
I think it depends on the role and the role that the player has in the team. So it's kind of like my current AD carry actually has a very unimportant role in the team. He bases his back and he auto attacks and he throws ash arrows and things like that. Anybody can do that, right? So that wouldn't matter that much. My support, for example, is our shot call. You know, my jungle, for example, it determines all of our early game. It's all based on his ability to track early game jungling. So I think it depends on the player and their role in the team.
Okay.
Rework Rift Herald. Opinion on reworked Rift Herald. I'm not sure. I mean, it depends how strong it is. I liked the idea of Herald dropping a buff that you pick up and then that player becomes empowered. I actually really like that. And I think that the current problem with dragons, in my opinion, is that most of the time you don't notice your dragon. Sometimes you might be like sitting in lane and you're like, oh wow, I'm full HP, like the ocean dragon, right? But usually speaking, you don't notice that you're going like 5% faster because you have cloud dragon. Usually players want to feel that they have some type of reward. Similar to like how they changed Sona, because Sona used to have, like give like the passive AoE, you know, buffs, and then he gave her like specific use of everything. Like she used and actually hit somebody before he should like it just gave them damage, you know. And I really like that. And I actually think it'd be kind of cool if they had it with drag. So I actually like old Herald. It's just super hard to balance. Now new Herald is also really hard to balance. And that it's literally just like Mordekaiser, basically. Basically, yeah, it's Mordekaiser with Dragon, pretty much. I like the idea in that I like pressure being important and being pushed in solo queue as teams understand pressure, and I feel like that's going to promote macro. I think competitive is insanely imbalanced and is likely to cause a lot of bad snowballing issues as it is. I like the idea of teams setting up dives and defending dives and things like that as being the core driving force of early game macro. So I'm not a big fan of like it coming down to team fights, because in that case, the team that wins that is either the team with the better top laner and mid laner, or the team who has like insanely good team-wide play.
Synergy?
Yeah, team-wide synergy, basically, which I'm not a big fan of that being a thing. Because the deal is, I think that is drastically better than Dragons, basically. Like if you trade that for like a cloud drag or something like that, you're winning. You know, like you'd much rather have. Well, no, other way around. You want to have Herald, you don't want to have the drag, right? So that just punishes teams that have strong bot lanes and weak top lanes really hard, and I'm not a big fan of that.
Okay. I do remember there was one thing I was mentioning. What would you say about like Rift Herald with the new one? If it alternates spots with the dragon, let's say both of them die, then it's random whichever one respawns into.
I'm not a big fan of RNG in general in games. I think that League actually probably has too much RNG. If you look at any like successful sport, they have no RNG because real life, and they try and balance it out. So I could say it could be balanced in the case that they did something like it spawned. I'm not entirely sure, but if they, I was for a second I was contemplating the idea they both spawn at both spots, so it's like Herald or Dragon, or the possibility of just Dragon getting like an active buffer as well, so that they're at least similar in that regard. I'm not really sure. If you swap it, the problem could then be one is drastically better than the other, and then that just gives whoever ends up getting first seed an advantage. And then if it's RNG, one side could just get it like over and over and over again, and that's just like totally unlucky. So I'm not really sure. I'm just not a huge fan of RNG as a whole.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now let's go to our next question. How did you come to be a paid coach for a pro team? Is there some advice you can give someone who's potentially want to pursue their career? One thing to mention, he's not pro yet. he, although he's one of the few paid college coaches.
I think there's probably like 3.
The other one's maybe Maryville?
Maryville doesn't have a coach. It's CC's coach gets paid, and I guess one of probably UCI probably pays a coach or something like that. So yeah, I'm one of the paid collegiate coaches. On top of that, Dan, my co-coach, is also paid. A lot of our coaches at RMU are paid, so not one of the only. Yeah, how did I come to this point? Basically, I have a background in StarCraft 2. I have a background in StarCraft 2, and basically I saw StarCraft was dying, so I wanted to switch to League, and I was quite bad at League, so I was like, okay, I'll be a manager, and then I started realizing all these trends of strategy that, you know, are in StarCraft that should be in League and are in League, but nobody noticed it. So I decided I wanted to become a coach, and I like started a whole bunch of teams. Like my first team was like gold level. This was back when they had ELO, so it wasn't even like actually gold. So I had like a 1300 ELO team, and then eventually like I ended up having like a plat level team, and then I had a diamond level team, which I coached into challenger. From there, I was added to the networking groups in Skype, and the networking groups in Skype are now kind of useless. Back then, it gave me access to a lot of people that I met, and then off of all those people, I started getting opportunities, and I kind of worked my way from like lower level challenger teams up the ladder, really just building my resume no different than how you do in pretty much any other job, and just developing my coaching. Eventually, it came to the point where one of my like first like really good teams was RMU. I worked here like 2 years ago, and I just moved the head coach here, contacted him about a job, and he told me to come in. I happen to live in Chicago, so I got this opportunity. I ended up leaving here. I did work with a lot of different LCS teams in like kind of an analyst role, or just like assisting their coaches in an unofficial role. And just basically building up the communication and like networking with different people. It's no different than any other job, really. You want to build your resume. It's not just like you know somebody so you get a job. A lot of the times you do have to be good at what you do, at least like slightly. So it's not, I don't want people to get the idea that it's just networking exclusively, but you do have to start building your name and building your brand and people understanding your skill set. I would say like I have like 2 major pieces of advice. Like A, work insanely hard and question everything, and B, don't make enemies, because scumbags always succeed in this industry, and if you make enemies with them, you would have been a lot better off being friends. Even if you don't actually like them, my biggest regrets are making enemies with people, because almost all of them are successful now. So yeah, don't make enemies, don't burn bridges. ever whatsoever.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Now, do you think it's detrimental to have a player on your team who likes to talk about random stuff during gameplay instead of only tactical data? So bringing up random comments, I guess.
99% of the time, yes, I think that that's bad. You want to be like totally focused on the game, and it can really throw off players who are kind of like in that flow state, who are like really, really focused, consciously focused, subconsciously focused on the game. So that's like, I think it's just like really, really good as a whole. But yeah, I would say usually speaking, it's bad. 90% of the time, it is really, really bad to have somebody talking about random stuff. With the small occasion of sometimes in really high stress scenarios, having somebody throw out like something funny can actually loosen the tension and loosen you up and help you play better. Sometimes being tense, you want to be focused but not tense. Sometimes having somebody like throw in a joking comment can like really bring down the scenario. Like my jungler RMU randomly screams for some reason, and the whole team will just start like bursting into laughter, which like is perfectly fine after we kill all of them when we're going on to Baron, because it just brings down the intensity a little bit and like makes sure that we're not tense but we're still focused. So it can be good. Usually it's bad.
Okay, thank you. Oh, this actually, I like this question here. Why are some players hard stuck in Diamond and can't get the Masters or Challenger?
Yeah, so specifically, he had mentioned pro players, and the reason that pro players are hard stuck Diamond can't get the Master Challenger is because a lot of the time they shouldn't be pro. And I know this may like be odd to some people, but League is really, really bad about recycling talent. Like, players will be bad, really bad. Like, for example, Sheep, who I believe is on Gold Coin or E United. No, Zazul's on E United. I think he's on Gold Coin. Sheep should not be in League of Legends. This guy is not good at League of Legends. Like, there are players who are just not good at League, but they have names and they have brands, so they get recycled over and over and over and over again.
So not to throw any like daggers anywhere, so Kiwi Kid getting picked up by Energy last season.
Yeah, like that probably shouldn't have been a thing either. There are so many amazing challenger players who don't get any opportunities, who are just drastically better than a lot of these pro players who are still somehow in here. I know SKT is looking for another support because Wolf dropped down to like D1. If you are D1, D2, D3, you are there for a reason. Right? If you're a challenger, you're there for a reason. This idea that you can be like a D5 jungler and actually compete in LCS is entirely untrue. So there are some exceptions to this. I would say a lot of the times it's because they shouldn't be pro and they're just being recycled over and over. There are some situations where there is a mental block in solo queue, or they're tilting, or they just don't try that hard. I know several players who just don't try.
Actually, like that's back 3 years ago. I decided, you know what, I'm gonna stop trolling around, stop messing around in silver. I dedicated an entire month to playing seriously. I climbed up from silver 5 to plat 1 to D5 promos in about a month, and I got banned for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
unfortunately, but I learned my lesson there, and but that's because I dedicated that time. So I put that mentality where I wanted to improve myself. And I think, I don't know if what you think about this, but if some of those D1 players change their mentality on how they approach their game, they could definitely kick up into Masters. Because is it limited?
No.
Yeah.
I think it's literally unlimited. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So if you're in Masters, trying to compete for that challenge spot, like you could show that you have that the potential to be a pro player. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's our mid laner RMU. It's literally all however he's feeling that month. You know, the guy will go from 800 LP Challenger down to D2, and you can literally just see it in how he's thinking and talking and things like that. So, yeah, mentality is a big aspect.
Okay. Well, our next question here. This is targeted towards bronze and silver coaching. Is there a point of teaching macro mechanics at all if no one else will respect them in the student's game? I tend to find that it's more efficient to simply ignore macro, focus on micro and winning lane. You did talk about this earlier on. However, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say 90% of the time it's much, much, much better to focus on micro. So the deal is like it's really hard to train micro, and if you are really bad at training micro, or for some reason it's just not sticking, you might want to switch over to focusing on macro. You know, that may be a better idea for you. In the case that you're training micro and it's working, keep training micro. I'd say at low level play, train the hell out of micro. But if it's not working, maybe you want to switch over and focus more on macro. I would say usually micro matters the most.
I also want to echo that. Like, you can take that into your solo queue as well. I think in solo queue, the better micro you have, the easier it is to get those people to listen to you, because you're going to win your lane. You put that pressure on the map. You can guide your team. The one reason why I got up to by 1.5 pros was I literally 2v4 bot lane all the way to the inhib, telling my teammates, hey, just keep doing your stuff to your lanes. I'll stall these guys away so you guys can just get your farm and get your turns. I'm not here to try and kill all these people. I will create that pressure so you can get this going. That's only because I have the mechanics to do that. Right now I don't, so I can't really do that anymore. But helping them improve on the micro mechanics will help them translate that into their solo queue play.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Let's see. From demos, we definitely have time. If you were looking to set up a team of silvers and golds that would stay together long term and improve together, how would you go about figuring out if the players are serious and on board for a long time improvement?
A lot of like low elo players will always say like I'm looking for something long term and like long term team stuff like that. I think it largely just depends on like making sure people mesh. I mean, I remember before I went to Coast, I actually genuinely enjoy playing the game like competitively. I'm just not like good enough to play professionally, right? So it's like I was playing on this diamond team with this group of guys. I think we were called like Wolfpack or something like that, and we were like super good friends. Like just genuinely got along really well. And we played together for like 6 or 7 months before I went to Coast. And then I went and hopped in the voice program that they used. It's called Dolby Axon, got shut down, but and they were still playing together, and they were still a team after like a year and like 2 months. I've never seen a low-level team do that ever. So I think that it just has to do like getting along together. They wanted to just play games, They were competitive, but they also wanted to play games. So it's like now they stopped playing League, but now they play Overwatch together. Same group of dudes.
It's like pickup stuff.
Yeah, I mean they just get along really well. I think that's like the core if you actually want long-term success with like these lower level teams. It's just ensuring that they get along. Like go do tryouts and see how they mesh as people. Not like we won a game, so yay, we're all happy. But like, what about when things don't go well? Or like, what about in game? Like, how are they just getting along? Or like in between games, are they chatting? Are they like talking about common interests? It's all about just like them getting along really well.
Awesome, thank you. Now we have another question over here. Thank you, Nayland. How do we deal with a player that suffers from strong anxieties that prevents them from performing in the long term, even if you know that they can do it? I guess we can relate this to the pro scene. One example could possibly be Golden Grill. He is typically said to have strong performances in scrims, and he is a high role player, so he shows that he has the potential. But how come we don't see him translating that into the pro play?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, with Golden Glue specifically, there's like a really, in my opinion, it's actually like a false narrative, and in League in general, there's so many false narratives. I 100% don't believe that Golden Glue is a problem. I mean, this is evident as TL continuing to be bad, even after they pick up double lift, even with Adrian, they didn't look good. Piglet on mid as like one of the better mid laners, like they just don't look good. Why? Because it's not all individual play. Like macro matters a lot, right? They only started looking better whenever they went and picked up, I think, Kane from C9.
Yeah. He was the positional coach for ADK?
He was an assistant coach for C9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and yeah, he comes in, they start looking better, right? That's just macro, I think, with Golden Glue. I don't think that he was the problem at all. And it was simply they weren't taught macro on that team. But I would say a better example, that would probably be Matt from TL, because he does have like panic attacks and has really bad anxiety and stuff along those lines. This is like quite hard because different people suffer from anxiety for different reasons. Some people just literally have anxiety like disorders that are like non-fixable whatsoever. I mean, it's just who they are. In the case that they don't have an actual anxiety disorder, and they simply are just kind of like a slightly more stressed out person, but not necessarily that they actually have a condition, then I would say usually speaking, you want to take off or like pull back the pressure, right? So usually speaking, I tell coaches like you want to put on stress, right? You want stress. Stress is good, right? But
a good amount, not too much.
yes. Like you want stress, but you don't want the response to be panic. The second that the response is panic, that's anxiety, right? But the second that the stress is like focused, then that's like focus, right? It like promotes focus and good performance. But the issue with that is just some people can't do that. So you might want to just like pull back the pressure. Talk about how like, okay, one step at a time, we're just trying to improve right now. This all this is about is improving. At the end of the day, we improve now, we'll win. Right? So this match, like the scrim we're playing right now, doesn't matter. It's literally just improving. So you might want to like pull it back and try and make it as like as focused on like improving and not necessarily like performance as possible, and just pull away from the anxiety to the best of your ability, and then try and figure out what conditions does this player need to feel most calm, right? And then try and create those conditions before important performances. So in the Art of Learning, Josh Waitzkin talks about how he was a like personal coach for a executive, and he goes through this whole process of like asking this executive, under what conditions do you feel most calm? And then he says like, whenever I'm throwing a baseball to my son, like they're playing ball, right? And then he says, what other things make you feel calm? And he was like listening. I think he was listening to Bon Jovi, reading and meditating, right? And so what he had him do was every single day he would like listen to Bon Jovi for like 15 minutes. He would like read for 15 minutes and he'd meditate for 15 minutes, and then he would go throw baseball with his son for 15 minutes, right? And he had him do that for a month, right? And then eventually he had him bring down those times to like 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And then every single time he was going in for a meeting, he took away throwing baseball with his son, had him do those 3 things, and that triggered him to feel relaxed, right? Because that's how he felt with his son. So it was like, this, and this will be a trigger for this other feeling, and you can utilize that to help with anxiety for players. It's like, when do you feel most relaxed? Find 4 things, and then put the biggest thing at the end. Have them do those 3 things consistently, right? Get rid of the biggest thing, replace it with your performance. He'll usually come out feeling relaxed for the performance. So that's like an approach that you can take that is really, really effective.
And also bouncing onto that, like when that can actually be related with when someone is being toxic because of stressors. When I was in high school, I'm always a laid back person. Like you might get that from my demeanor, but whenever I would get stressed out, it would actually get to the point where I can't think about anything else but that stress. One way that I would do it was I would go take a soccer ball to the soccer field, go to the goal, kick the ball as hard as I can. I keep kicking the ball, chasing the ball back until I hit each of the corners, like without aiming. I just kick as hard as I can. I just let that stress out of me.
Yeah.
That was like one of my, I guess, conductive ways. Although sometimes it took a long time to get that done, but that helped me reset myself and also to, I guess, keep myself more mentally sane. And that's just because I was a soccer player, and that's my method of resetting and de-stressing myself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
so yeah. Let's see over here. How do you? Okay, Malik Bell. Do you work much together with? Do you work together with analysts? How different is doing analyzing versus coaching?
So basically, I think that most teams use analysts very horribly, and I think that there's a horrible perception of like what an analyst is. So like, to me, an analyst's job is to find trends that a coach cannot find, right? So a lot of that, what I've utilized in the past, is just statistics and finding trends that you cannot see with like the bare eye, or seeing very specifically how matchups work. And like lane matchups and how teams come ahead. Really, really good analysts can look at like actual LCS data of like certain matchups and like the gold per minute of those matchups based on how close the jungler is to factor out the jungler and like things like that. And they'll then know exactly how that matchup should go over the course of like 100-something games, because they have the information from Riot's API off of all of this, and it's super useful for coaches. sometimes an analyst job is to scout out and look for very specific trends within a team and then create game plans for you. But basically, an analyst job is to look at very specific trends, not necessarily the long-term plans of the team or how the team's going to train things or what the current focuses are going to be for the team, but finding trends for the coach, and then the coach can then direct how they're going to go about it with the team. It's not to compensate for a lack of knowledge of the coach. That just means your coach is bad. It's not to compensate for any weakness of your coach. That means your coach is bad. So an analyst should supplement information that your coach simply cannot get.
So basically, provide the resources for them to do their job.
Yeah.
Make the job easier.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So it should be things that they just cannot see or find on their own. That's the most ideal way of going about it at like the highest level.
Yeah, awesome. Our next question. Oh, do you work with analysts?
Yes. My biggest skill is finding good analysts. But that's my biggest thing. Is like it's really hard to find quality analysts. I'd rather find really, really good people than a lot of people. It's way better to find like 2 good people than 10 people.
Yeah.
Right. So I have one analyst I work with at RMU. His name's Mickey. He's actually on the second team.
Yeah.
He's the best analyst I've worked with
And
anywhere.
you also have another coach.
Yeah, I have an
well,
assistant
too.
coach who basically just helps me split all the work. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Imagine your team is going into a well-paid tournament, and you have a newcomer with you who doesn't have a lot of experience, so a rookie. How do you prepare this player for the upcoming stress of the tournament to make sure he performs as to the best of his potential?
Yeah. I'm a big advocate, as I mentioned before, of increasing stress in practice. If you increase stress in practice while they're playing, the stress on stage is going to be drastically less. If they're already used to that stress, either way, stress on stage is much, much less. So it's like, for example, our first blocks at RMU 2 to 5 overlaid with some of the practice of the varsity reserve teams. So it was really, really loud in the arena, and I would be over their shoulders all the time, and I'd be like talking to them. I'd be like creating that stress. And so whenever they got on stage and there's like 50 people in an audience, or actually it was almost 1,000 people in our Winter Nova's campus class, it was like not that bad. It really wasn't that bad. So it's like, it's slightly worse, not that bad. You want to increase intensity, which means like you want your practices to look as much like competition as possible, so that when you actually get to competition, it just feels like practice, right? So the deal would be like, if you're online and you're not live with your players like I am, that could just be like, you get out of game, what are we doing? How are we getting better? Boom, boom, boom. You're like trying to be as fast and you want to speak with intensity, right? And like speak with confidence and just go, 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 right? And it creates that stress, which is really, really, really good. And ideally, you might want to increase the length of your play too. If you increase the length of your play, maybe you're scrimming 3 hours, maybe you want to increase that to 5 hours or something, no breaks. And just like make it stressful, make it hard, right? Push their limits. They get on stage, it's not near as bad as it normally would be. I think that's probably the best approach.
What's your opinion about this approach? So one thing I like to do with my players when we're doing our practice matches, even in scrims, at a certain point, I'll evaluate where they are in the game. So let's say at 20 minutes they have a 15K gold lead. I tell them, hey guys, at this point of the game, you guys have 5 lives left, and you guys need to take Baron and end the game by X amount of time. What's your opinion about that on increasing stress?
I think for that to be done, there's probably like a very perfect amount of like lives and like Baron and things like that you need per like K of gold in certain situations and stuff like that for it to actually be like pushing the limit. Because like it could just be that like them not dying 5 times is super freaking easy.
The time limit's like really short as well. They get only like 8 minutes to take that Baron, push down. If they don't time their pressure and manipulate the ways where it creates opportunity, they weren't being efficient. And then we can take a look and be like, oh, you see this? You could have done this here and here. Do that.
Yeah. So I think creating that stress and like that time thing is good in terms of just like creating stress. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of their actual skill necessarily, because a lot of the times it's just that they don't know. You know, it's like you may tell them close out in 3 minutes, they can't close out in 3 minutes just because they literally don't know. And that may be good to like be stressed, like that may be good to like push stress, may not necessarily be good to like improve performance in the case that they just like don't know. Because a lot of the times it's not players like not putting in the will. Plenty of times it's really just that they don't know what the right response is. So I would say that's a good approach in the case that you're trying to create that stress. And yeah, I think that can be really good. So I'm just specific on like the time and lives and stuff like that.
Okay, awesome. On a subject of books, what are your favorites?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple before. I could probably like keep going. I have like so many favorites, but yeah, I said Leading with the Heart or By the Heart, can't remember, by Coach K or Coach Krzyzewski. That's not how it's spelled, by the way. Wooden by John Wooden. It's all about just life as well as coaching. The Art of Learning by John Waitskin is insanely good. Talent Code by Daniel Coyle is really, really good. What else? I mean, there's so many. My most recent favorite has been Stealing Fire. Have no clue who it's by. I can't remember their names. It's by 2 authors. That's really, really helpful. Obviously, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell it's insanely valuable as well, just in terms of perceiving talent. What else? I've read so many books, non-related. Actually, Turn That Ship Around, I think is the name of it. It basically goes in depth around like the leadership styles of like the captain on a nuclear submarine and like how he leads everything to work really well. That one was a really big changer for me. How to Win Friends and Influence People. I forgot the author of that. That's a classic, just about how to lead people. In the case you want to progress your career, I think it's The 48 Laws of Power is a really, really good one in terms of progressing your career. Start With Why by Simon Sinek is a really good one. So those would definitely be my favorites. They've like led me to where I am now as a coach. Most recently with my like developments in subconscious training, Stealing Fire has been the biggest one recently. It's totally changed how I perceive training altogether. But yeah, I see one question.
2 more questions here.
Oh, and a question.
One thing I do want to I actually want to comment a little bit for this question. So I coach an AD carry player who plays very passive in the lane despite not needing to be so passive. They miss good trades and loses lanes that they could have won because of this. Any tips for teaching your players aggro? One comment that I would have is I would tell them you can look at it as 2 issues. 1, they don't understand the matchup and they don't understand their potential. 2, the way I always tell my players, I start off like, hey, if I notice that they don't know their full capabilities, I tell them for the first few practices, go as far, push your limits, take all those risky plays, understand the basics of your champion, the limits, because right now is your time to experiment and to push limits. I don't want you trying to do that on stage because that's a high risk scenario with a low that's high risk, high reward. Here it's high risk, low risk, high reward because you develop that having understand what's going on here. So
yeah. I think that at the core you have to figure out exactly what is screwing up. So whenever I break down micro, I break it down into basically movement and effective ability usage. So basically effective usage of abilities. And so if it's like movement, it may be that he's very bad at dodging abilities, right? And so what you can have him do is play like Faker. Faker steps up to minion waves, like really far up, and he lets you throw abilities. He predicts that you're going to throw it, and he dodges it, and then he hits you, right? So it may just be like you had said, be really aggressive, be really upfront, and force yourself to dodge those abilities. It may be that you're not pressuring enough whenever they're clearing minions, in which case what you can do is tell them every single minion wave, I want you to try and trade an auto, or at least get one, or ideally get one auto advantage. Like I want you to pressure him on every single minion wave, 1 minion. Then if he is really good about doing that for say 10 minutes, then increase it 2 minions. Every single time, every single minion wave, he clears 2 minions. I want him pressured as he clears those minions, right? Eventually, you can get up to like every minion wave, every single minion, I want you to be on top of him. And that's going to allow you to learn how to trade on minions really, really well. You want to build that over time. So the core is figure out exactly what the issue is. Like, is he bad at dodging things? Is he just positioning poorly? Teach him, like, first teach him. Don't just tell him, like, yo, pressure these minions. Teach him why, how, give him visual examples. Then you actually get to, like, pressure him with these kind of drills and things along those lines.
Implement into the game.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so here's one question. Oh, we got one more there. So, how does a new coach go about teaching basic macro to the loyal team? I know you mentioned that you want to go with the micro because they're not at the level where they have that micro down.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not working, you can go into the macro. But how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So basically, I break down macro into like a whole bunch of different fundamentals. Basically, you have on-objective plays and off-objective plays. For the sake of simplicity, because off-objective plays get very complex into like realms of psychology and stuff, I'll stick to on-objective plays. What you want to end up doing is going and basically the fundamentals of macro are every single play revolves around either pressure, vision, or my most recent development, which has basically been speed. And I mentioned this before, but you want to just focus entirely on, say, pressure-based plays at the beginning, because like, so like, focus entirely on pressure-based plays, pick an objective, have them create that play as many times as possible. Start with outers, work your way in. That way you get more repetitions, right? Say that you want to execute on bot outer off of a pressure-based play. So that usually it's going to be mid pushes out, bot pushes out, your jungler comes, 4 men dive 4v2. That may be your play. Do that 10 times in a row in practice, 10, 15 times in a row until you really have it, right? And then your next play may be mid, right? So then you might want to have a support jungle roam up to mid, get a pick, and then go for mid outer. And then maybe maybe inners, you want to start looking at inner plays, and maybe that would be setting up a 1-3-1 and then figuring out how that plays. And basically, like, identify the play, teach them the concepts, identify if it is based on pressure or if it is based on denying a vision or if it's based on speed, which is insanely hard to teach. I would stick with pressure and vision, and then start with that, the pressure vision, make sure they really understand what that means. Pressure is all about pushing out lanes, forcing responses, creating plays off of that. And then the core aspect of vision is about denying vision and then punishing them in Fog of War or from Fog of War, right? And make sure they really get that and then give them examples of these plays. Just pick a tower, pick a dragon or a baron, and then teach them how to make plays on those different things, right? And then drill it over and over and over and over again and create ideal situations to where it can come up over and over and over again. And that's how I train with my team as well. I think it's the same exact thing that you do with like lower level teams too. I don't think macro changes from high level play to low level play basically, except enemy teams just get better at preventing it.
Yeah.
Like my team could dive an enemy team who's like silver all the time if they wanted to. But as you get up to challenger, you'll have less opportunities basically.
And what was I going to say? What's my train of thought there? Actually, I do want to have a comment about the speed play. One thing that, the way I look at it, I don't know if I understand your definition of a speed play. I think that once players, whether it's a shot caller or the players have a general understanding of all their champions on the team and their itemization and power spikes, so they understand the DPS coming out. Let's say you have a Vayne with a Bork and Phantom Dancer. That plus a Kindred jungle can clear out a Baron pretty fast.
Yeah.
Even at a 22-minute, like you could pull it off if you have like some basic vision there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the reason why speed-based plays are really hard to train is because if you see where they are and you know that it is impossible for them to get to you in time, that's largely a vision-based play. Like there are elements to you needing to obviously clear it fast, but you know that they can't get to you. That's a vision-based play. A speed-based play is like you have a general idea as to where they might be, right? But you are entirely reliant on you being able to clear and get back before they are able to either get to you and kill you or get to a counterplay and take the counterplay.
Okay.
And even at highest level of play, best example being I think C9 versus P1 game 2. C9 goes for a dragon, P1 gets to mid before they can get to mid, they lose a free mid tower. So it's things like that, and those are insanely hard to
I
train.
actually
Because
remember that play.
it's really, really hard to teach players to like calculate damage. That's why it's like it's
Yeah.
almost impossible to really train these things. There's
You learn
some
through
elements.
experience,
Yeah,
for the most
there's some,
part.
and that's the hard part because they don't come up often, right?
Mhm.
So it's like there's some elements where it's different, but it's really hard to train them.
All right. Well, our last question, I believe, is when do we see the great Drake from RMU on the LCS stage?
I actually have a couple EU LCS possibilities or opportunities,
Oh.
which I have been told, quoting, is probably an 80% chance of them going through.
Hint, hint, Splice just dropped a head coach.
I would say it's not Splice, but I'd say there's actually a fairly decent chance that that ends up going through. In the case that doesn't go through, I do have 2 NA possible opportunities, not necessarily guaranteed to be head coach like the EU ones would, but they could go through. The EU ones are a shocker, I'll tell you that. But the NA ones, they could go through. One's like really well known. FlyQuest is recruiting coaches. CLG is recruiting positional coaches. So that's a possibility as well.
So are you open to positional coaches?
Possibly. I've actually said in the past that I don't think I'd be a great positional coach. I think that like in the leader, teacher, expert area of things, my biggest strength is actually teaching. Because I've like tried to break down the game into basics as opposed to just like being an expert, which is just understanding every single thing to the smallest bit. And I think positional coaches tend to be very good, like 80% expert, 20% teacher, right? So I think my problem is kind of like in like the split of things, I'm a much better leader and teacher. Like I'm probably like 50% teacher and then like 25% leader, 25% expert, right? And I think it needs to be a different mix. But I would definitely be open to it, and I'm looking into it at the moment.
So basically, if you win a ULOL, you have an opportunity.
Yes, sure. I do think collegiate's a really good opening for coaches to get into LCS. I actually think it's the best opportunity to get into LCS. Is collegiate's exploding, and it's you get really good opportunities to train yourself as a coach because it's a long season, and ACS is a 6-week season. ULOL starts in like January and goes till May, so you have a long time to.
You also have that preseason in the fall, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, so like I've been coaching at RMU since October all the way until late May, so like long seasons really help.
Oh, actually, that's a good point. Well, I'll actually have Drake put in his social media. I think.
I just changed my Twitter. I have to go check it.
Oh.
I changed it like 2 days ago whenever I got this EU offer. Okay, I got it.
Right.
Twitter is at CoachDrakeLOL.
All right. Well, actually, I noticed that at CoachDrakeLOL.
Yep. That's my Twitter. You guys can go follow that.
And then your Twitch?
Oh yeah, my Twitch is Zenith Light Esports. That's that one. Yep.
You can follow them over there at
I
Twitter
stream
and
very
Twitch.
often. Yeah, I stream very often, just talking about all sorts of coaching concepts and feeding videos and looking like VODs as well. I go into like really abstract concepts that I think are extremely useful for coaches. I'd actually highly recommend it. Not even just trying to plug myself, but I wish I had that resource.
I actually echo that. Well, yesterday actually, while I was busy doing my own stuff, I was tuning in on Twitch, kind of like a podcast, so to speak, listening in on when he was bringing down all the top teams.
Yep.
I think it was just Phoenix 1, Cloud9, TSM, and Fly.
I went over CLG and FlyQuest.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And he's does that. Something as educational as that throughout the week, honestly.
Yeah.
Earlier in the
pretty
week.
much every single day I stream about like 6-ish hours, just trying to like break down something on my mind about macro. And in that one, I was breaking down the strengths and weaknesses and how to train every single team in LCS. So that's like a new perspective.
And you might even see me compete with him in team drafts.
Oh yeah.
So we still have to do that.
Yeah, I don't think we've done that yet. But I do a lot of draft analysis and drafting too. I bring on a lot of people. I've had Evan, my supporter, Evan RL, on stream. A lot of other like really high-rated coaches too, and things like that too. So.
And if time permits, we might actually invite him again if we are able to pull off another session with us. So.
Yeah, for sure, I've definitely done that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. Thank you, all the visitors and viewers, for stopping by with all your questions and listening on everything. And yeah, we all appreciate it. We appreciate RMU providing this opportunity to do it in their esports center. I guess shout out to Twitch, iBuyPower, Republic Gamers, Steel Series, and DX Racer for sponsoring RMU, and also Learning 5 for sponsoring this event. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys have a fantastic evening.
I don't think we're bringing.